At this time, we will discuss the 5 requirements or conditions that are necessary in order for a claim to be accepted. The 5 requirements for entitlement are listed here. Number 1, timely filing. 2, civil employee. 3, fact of injury. 4, performance of duty. 5, causal relationship. Claims examiners examine the evidence and they consider these 5 requirements in sequential order. This means if a claimant or an injured employee was diagnosed with a medical condition due to a work-related injury and the claim was not timely filed, then the adjudication decision would be to deny the claim. Because the claim was not timely filed, the claims examiner does not have to consider the other 4 requirements because they are considered irrelevant. For the next few minutes, we're going to discuss each of these 5 requirements separately. First requirement, timely filing. To be considered timely, the Form CA-1 that's used for traumatic injury claims must be filed within 3 years of the date of injury. Form CA-5 for survivors must also be filed within 3 years from the date of the employee's death. However, when filing occupational disease claims using the Form CA-2, time begins to run when the employee becomes aware or should have been aware of a possible relationship between the medical condition and the employment, as well as the date of last exposure. Second requirement is civil employee. If the claim is timely filed, the claims examiner will then determine if the claimant is a federal employee based on the meaning in the law. Hence, the second requirement for FECA coverage is civil employee. The FECA covers all civilian federal employees except for non-appropriated funded employees. However, under special legislation in the FECA, coverage is also extended to Peace Corps volunteers, volunteer members of the Civil Air Patrol, the Job Corps, the Youth Conservation Corps, the Civil Air Patrol, and non-federal law enforcement officers under certain circumstances involving crimes against the United States. Temporary employees are also covered on the same basis as permanent employees. Certain contract employees, volunteers, and loaned employees are also covered under some circumstances. However, this determination will be made on a case-by-case basis once the claim has been filed. Once the issues of time and civil employment have been resolved, the claims examiner must establish that the employee did in fact sustain an injury or occupational disease. This brings us to the third requirement, fact of injury. There are 2 components to fact of injury. The first one is factual. This means, did the employee actually experience the accident, the event, or employment factor that is alleged to have occurred? This is resolved on the basis of factual evidence, including statements from the employee, the supervisor, and any witnesses. However, please know, an injury does not need to be witnessed in order to be compensable. In other words, it is not mandatory to have an eyewitness to the injury or incident. The second component is medical. Here, the claims examiner is concerned with determining whether an employment factor resulted in an injury or disease. This determination is based on the treating physician's statement that a medical condition is present that could be related to the incident. It should also be noted that mere exposure, for instance, to a contagious condition or duty environment, does not constitute an injury. We also do well to note that in accordance with the FECA regulations, it is the employee's responsibility or burden to prove the merits of his or her claim, as I stated previously. However, the employing agency should certainly assist the employee in providing or gathering the necessary factual evidence, such as hearing test results if the employee were to file a claim for hearing loss. The claims examiner accepts that the first three requirements or criteria have been met, then it must be determined whether the injured employee was in the performance of duty when the injury or illness occurred. An injury is generally said to have occurred in the performance of duty if the injury arose during the course of employment. In other words, did the injury occur while the employee was at work and performing work-related duties? Okay, if the answer is yes, then the next thing that the claims examiner looks at is, did this incident happen out of employment? Arising out of employment means that the incident was related to some aspect or circumstance of the employment, not to personal non-work circumstances. Therefore, an employee who falls on the restroom floor due to a wet spot, or the employee who falls on the cafeteria floor while getting lunch. Yes, it's true, the employee is not performing the work duties for which he or she was hired, but you cannot be at the workplace for 8, 9, or 10 hours a day and not use the restroom facilities, or go to the agency's cafeteria to get lunch or coffee if you're fortunate to have one. Such actions are considered incidental to employment, therefore rising out of employment, and is considered to be in the performance of duty. The following examples that are typical performance of duty issues. Under the FECA regulations, there is called the Industrial Premises Rule. An employee who is injured on the agency's premises during work hours has the protection of the FECA unless the employee was engaged in an activity that removes the employee from the scope of employment. Coverage includes injuries that occur while the employee was performing assigned duties or engaging in an activity which was reasonably associated with employment. Such activities include use of facilities for the employee's comfort, health, and convenience, as well as eating meals and snacks provided on the premises. For example, an employee who decides to work out in the fitness center during lunchtime on the premises of the agency. If the employee were to fall off the treadmill, that employee would be considered in the performance of duty. The agency premises also include areas immediately outside the building, such as steps or sidewalks, if these are federally owned or maintained. Number 2, the parking garage. According to the FECA, the agency's premises also include the parking facilities that it owns, controls, manages, or leases space. If the employee's tour of duty starts at 7:30 a.m. and the employee fell while exiting the car due to an oily spot on the ground at 7 a.m., the employee is considered in the performance of duty. It's true, the employee has not checked in or reported to their workstation. However, in accordance with the FECA regulations, 30 minutes before one tour starts and 30 minutes at the end of one's tour is considered a reasonable amount of time and is considered to be in the performance of duty. It would be appropriate for the supervisor to submit a statement indicating whether the agency owns or leases the parking lot, and if the latter, the name and the address of the owner would be most helpful, as that type of information may be needed for the purposes of developing a third-party aspect of the claim. Number 3, lunch hour, also considered as the personal comfort doctrine. Injuries that occur during lunch hour off the premises are not ordinarily covered unless the employee is in travel status or performing regular duties off the premises. As I stated earlier, though an employee is not actually performing work duties, the employee would be considered in the performance of duty if eating lunch on the premises, having a coffee break, or going to the restroom, because these activities are incidental to employment and fall under the personal comfort doctrine. Number 4, what about travel status? Employees in travel status are covered 24 hours a day for all reasonable incidents of their temporary duty. Thus, an employee injured on a sightseeing trip in the city to which they were assigned would not be covered, while an employee who is injured while taking a shower at the hotel would be covered. The point is, sightseeing is not mandatory while on travel. However, taking a shower or bath is essential while on travel. All claims for injuries occurring during travel status should be accompanied by a copy of the travel authorization. The 5th one, off-premises injuries. FECA coverage is also extended to workers such as letter carriers and chauffeurs who perform services away from the employer's premises. It is also extended to workers who are sent on errands or special missions and workers who perform services from their homes. Employees who have been approved for teleworking are only afforded coverage if they were injured while performing official duties in the designated site where work is performed. If the employee steps away from this specific location to perform a personal errand, such as preparing dinner in the kitchen, washing a load of clothes in the laundry room or in the garage or whatever, the FECA coverage is not applicable. Okay, what about injuries not considered in the performance of duty? The first one, to and from work. Employees do not have the protection of the FECA when injured en route between work and home, except when the agency furnishes the employee's transportation to and from work. Number 2, if the employee is required to travel during a curfew or emergency. Number 3, if the employee is on standby duty and is called into work. And number 4, if the employee is required to use his or her vehicle during the workday. Such claims should be accompanied by a description of the circumstances. If an employee is scheduled to attend a meeting off-site and deviates from the most direct route in order to care for some personal errand and sustains an injury, that employee would not be considered in the performance of duty, and the injury is non-compensable. What about outside working hours? FECA coverage is extended to employees who are on the premises for a reasonable time before or after working hours. Usually a half hour before or after work is considered a reasonable amount of time. Coverage is not extended, however, to employees who are visiting the premises for non-work related reasons. For example, if an employee goes to work to show off her newborn child while on maternity leave, if she were to fall on the floor and fracture her arm, she would not be considered in the performance of duty and would be ineligible for FECA benefits. It should also be noted, it is the supervisor's responsibility to verify the time of the injury and provide any information about the employee's purpose for being at the premises at the time of the injury. The third one we'll consider is at lunch off premises. If an employee was at lunch or on a coffee break off the premises, the employee is not considered to be in the performance of duty because the employee is removed from the agency's premises. If the employee decided to leave the agency's premises to go to the bank to take care of some personal financial business and the employee sustained an injury, it would not be considered in the performance of duty. After the 4 requirements have been met, now the claims examiner determines if there is causal relationship between the condition claimed and the injury or exposure sustained. Causal relationship is different from fact of injury in that fact of injury determines that a medical condition is present. Causal relationship establishes the connection or link between the injury and the condition found. This requirement is based entirely on medical evidence provided by the physician who has examined and treated the employee. There are 4 types of causal relationships. The first one, direct causation. This term refers to situations where the injury or factors of employment result in the condition claimed through a natural, unbroken sequence. For example, a fractured arm sustained in a fall would be considered as a direct result of the fall. Number 2, aggravation. This type of causal relationship occurs if a pre-existing condition has worsened, either temporarily or permanently, by a work-related injury. The condition is said to be aggravated. For example, a traumatic back injury may aggravate an employee's pre-existing degenerative disc disease. Acceleration. A work-related injury or occupational disease may hasten the development of an underlying condition. For example, an employee's diabetes may be accelerated by a work schedule which is so erratic that it prohibits the regular food intake required by a person with this condition. The 4th causal relationship known as precipitation. This type of causal relationship refers to a latent condition which would not have manifested itself had it not been for the employment. For example, an employee may have tuberculosis that was dormant or latent for several years, but now was precipitated by a specific work-related factor. So, if all 5 conditions for FECA coverage have been met, the adjudication decision by the claims examiner will be to accept the claim and process the appropriate FECA benefits. An acceptance letter is mailed to the claimant or injured employee, informing that employee of the accepted condition and other pertinent information relevant to the claim. A courtesy copy of the acceptance letter is also mailed to the CBP Injury Compensation Specialist.